Hello and welcome back to Your Productivity Pulse, the podcast where we explore the heart of how we use our time, blending real stories, reflection, and practical strategy so that productivity becomes something that strengthens our lives rather than overwhelms it. Now it's time to grab your hot cup of tea or take a sip of the cold coffee that's sitting in your car console because it's time to take your pulse. Your productivity pulse, that is. Today's episode is a little different. Most of the time when we talk about productivity, we talk about schedules, goals, projects, deadlines, and all the things we need to get done. But today, I want to pause because being productive is not only about accomplishing tasks. Being productive can also be about recognizing the people who helped shape the person we have become, taking time to reflect on those moments, taking time to say thank you. And today feels like the perfect day to do that because this episode is honoring International Women's Day. So I invited a few women in my circle to take a moment of reflection and share a story about a woman who shaped a moment in their lives. Not necessarily someone famous, not someone in a history book, but someone who showed up, someone who took the time, someone whose presence, kindness, encouragement, or wisdom created a ripple that continues even today. As you listen to these stories, I want to invite you to do something simple. If someone comes to mind, a teacher, a mentor, a friend, a coach, a neighbor, a family member, jot their name down. Start a gratitude journal for the people in your life who helped shape you. And then attach an action to that gratitude. Maybe you send them a message. Maybe you write them a letter. Maybe you simply tell someone the story of how they impacted you. Because productivity is more than getting work done. True productivity is about giving back to the world that helped build us. Today we are focusing on women who made a difference. But if your reflection brings someone else to mind, jot it down anyway. Some thank yous are long overdue. Let's begin with the first story. Sheila Thompson. The first story takes place on a day that many of us remember exactly where we were. September 11th, 2001. One woman shared this experience from when she was a medical student assigned to a Veterans Administration hospital. That morning, her team was doing early rounds when the first emergency code went off. A patient was having a cardiac event. The team rushed to stabilize him. Then another code went off, and another, and another. It was chaos. They didn't yet understand what was happening. Finally, sometime after 10 a.m. Eastern Time, someone realized the unimaginable. The team stepped into the ICU room and watched a video of a plane hitting the World Trade Center. The rest of the day blurred together, responding to emergencies, turning off televisions in patients' rooms, comforting terrified veterans, trying to continue caring for patients while the world seemed to be unraveling. When she finally got home that evening, she was exhausted and overwhelmed with grief and worry. She had a friend who worked at the World Trade Center. She didn't want to leave the house. Her husband went to a prayer meeting at their church, but she refused to go. About 30 minutes later, the phone rang. It was Sheila Thompson. Sheila had done premarital counseling for the couple years earlier. She listened as the young medical student poured out everything that had happened that day. Then Sheila did something simple and profound. She came and picked her up. And that night, this exhausted young woman sat on the floor of her church while people prayed for their nation. She cried. She released the weight of the day, and she will always remember the woman who stepped into the mess of that moment with her. Sometimes, the people who shape us most are the ones who simply show up when the world feels too heavy to carry alone. Story number 2. Mrs. Davis. The next story takes us back to high school, to a French teacher named Mrs. Davis. In 8th grade, a group of students were selected to skip Latin and move directly into French or Spanish. But they joined the class a month after the school year had already started, which meant there was catching up to do. Reading and writing came quickly. Pronunciation, not so much. So Mrs. Davis stayed after school to tutor. Now, most students didn't love Mrs. Davis. She was strict, she was older, and life hadn't always been easy to her. But one student saw something different. Encouragement. Possibility. This young woman came from a small, rural, blue-collar town. Many of the teachers and counselors didn't have very high expectations of farm kids. But Mrs. Davis did. She pushed her to advanced classes. She helped her with essays. She reviewed applications. She even spoke with her mother about financial aid. And there was one small moment that stayed with her forever. While reviewing an essay, Mrs. Davis started to suggest removing the word great from the document. Then she paused, and she said something unexpected. No, never mind. That's you. That's your personality, Renee. Leave it in. It was such a small moment, but it was one of the first times someone had said that being exactly who she was more than okay. It was totally enough. That encouragement helped open the door to college, to opportunity, to possibility. Sometimes the women who shape us are the ones who see who we are becoming before we see it ourselves. The third story takes place in a high school library with a librarian named Mrs. Fitzgerald. During high school, this student had several free periods and decided to spend them in the library. This young woman was uncertain about her future. Her parents were divorced, money was tight. College felt like something that might be out of her reach. She had applied to a few local schools, but half-heartedly. She didn't know how she would ever afford it. One day after Christmas break, in early January, Mrs. Fitzgerald walked up to her in the library and she said, "Kim, I need you to write me an essay, and I need you to do it right now, today." So Kim sat down at the computer and wrote it. She doesn't even remember what the essay was about. She handed it to Mrs. Fitzgerald and thought nothing more of it. What she didn't know was that Mrs. Fitzgerald had mailed the essay that very day to a college Kim had applied to. It had to be postmarked that day, and that essay earned her the presidential scholarship. As long as she maintained her certain GPA, her college tuition would be free. All she had to pay for were her books, which, by the way, she managed to get another scholarship to pay for those too. A door opened because someone believed in her enough to act. Sometimes the women who shape our lives are the ones who quietly move mountains behind the scenes. And now I want to share a story from my own life. I was 6 years old, and Mrs. Hildrum ran a tight ship in my grade 1 classroom. One morning the bell rang, and 23 students quickly found their way to the carpet for morning announcements. But one student was missing. Scott. Mrs. Hildrum settled us down and began explaining the day ahead. She said, "I have a favor to ask of everyone." Well, Scott's mom had called earlier that morning. Scott had gotten a haircut the day before, and it had not turned out the way he wanted. He was embarrassed and afraid people would laugh at him. Mrs. Hildrum told us he would be arriving shortly, and she asked us to treat him normally, not to react to the haircut, and just to go about our day. Now, you might think there's a lesson here about doing what you're told, but when Scott walked through the door, I burst out into laughter. Not just a little giggle, but full-on laughter. Scott was sad. Mrs. Hildrum was not impressed, and she immediately gave me a detention. A detention! I had never been in trouble before in my life. I was devastated. I apologized to Scott and sat quietly the rest of the day. When the final bell rang, everyone left except for me and Mrs. Hildrum. She walked over and knelt beside my desk, and she said, "I could really use some help scraping the papier-mâché off the floor." She didn't lecture me. She simply invited me to help. We sat on the floor together, scraping dried glue and paper. I don't remember exactly what we talked about, but I knew there were tears. Looking back now as an adult, I see the wisdom in what she did. She had asked me to show compassion, and when I failed to do that, she showed it to me. She walked me through the experience instead of shaming me. In the early 1970s, corporal punishment was still very much a reality in schools. That story could have gone very differently, but instead, Mrs. Hildrum taught me something profound. She showed me what true compassion looked like. And I have carried that lesson with me my entire life. Have I always succeeded? No, but I've always tried. Thank you, Mrs. Hildrum, for shaping a fundamental piece of who I am. So today, as we celebrate International Women's Day, I invite you to take a moment to think about the women who helped shape your life. The teacher, the mentor, the friend, the women who believed in you. Write their names down. Start a gratitude journal about people who helped you. And attach an action to that gratitude. Be intentional. Be accountable. Send the message. Write the note. Tell the story. Because productivity isn't just about managing time. It's about honoring the moment and the people that make our time meaningful. And sometimes the most productive thing we can do is say thank you. So I offer a special thank you to Christine, Kim, and Renee for taking the time to share their stories about the women who made a difference in their lives. Thank you so much for spending your time with me on this episode of Your Productivity Pulse. If today's conversation sparked a moment of action or reflection, I invite you to keep that momentum going. More practical strategies designed to enhance productivity, reduce stress, and weave balance back into your life can be found by joining my newsletter at banartexpression.com. Once there, just head over to your Productivity Pulse podcast page to sign up, or you can find the link in the show notes. Remember, intention plus accountability equals productivity. Until next time, keep listening to your pulse.